Bonjour, hi. Je m'appelle Ashley et je travaille pour le département bibliothèque et événements communautaires de la ville de Westmount. Welcome to this edition of Fireside Chats with Mitch Joel, where we sit down and bring you insightful and candid conversations with special guests from the Westmount community. Our excellent host is entrepreneur, author, and media personality, Mr. Mitch Joel. We are so happy to have you here with us, Mitch. Our special guest for this episode is Westmounter Nadia Lakhdari. Nadia is the author of several book series for kids and young adults, including Premier Trio, Colloque, and the Choupinette books. It's my pleasure to introduce Mitch Joel and Nadia Lakhdari.
Well, thanks so much, Ashley. Happy to be here. And hey, let's not wait any longer. Let's bring in Nadia. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
It's great to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It has been a while.
And normally we see each other at the hockey arena, at the recreation center, but that's been a while.
We see each other there, but my son has grown up and he's moved beyond the early hockey years. So we'll have to find other venues in Westmount to bump into each other.
Yeah, I was thinking about, well, as I prepared for this conversation, that I remember the first time I met you. I don't know if you remember, but it was at C2, MTL, the big conference. I was speaking at it, and I think you were working for the organization, right?
I was at the time, yes. And I remember in 2012, I remember you interviewed Ariana Huffington on stage.
Right.
So that might have been the first time that we collaborated.
Yeah. And then, of course, you know, I connect usually with people who I connect with on LinkedIn, and I start uncovering this entire life of yours that becomes extremely strange because one of my kids was actually reading your books too at the same time. It became this weird thing where I'm seeing you at hockey, my kids are reading your books. So let's do a bit of an origin story on you, Nadia.
Sure.
Tell people who are probably very confused by this intro what you're about and what you do.
Sure. So I'll start back in the present time and I can do a quick loop back to the past then. So what I do mainly is that I'm an author. I write young adult novels and kids novels in French in Quebec with Les Éditions Les Malins. I have a series out at the moment called Premier Trio, which is about hockey, funnily enough, because that's often where we would see each other. The inspiration really came from the Westmount hockey scene, actually, because when my son was about 12, playing in a relatively competitive league, there was a girl playing in his team, and she was amazing. She was scoring all these goals. She was made assistant captain, and she was very well integrated. And I remember being so impressed by this young woman and thinking, back in my day, these things didn't happen. Like, girls weren't allowed to play hockey. We had to play ringuette back then, if you remember that. And so it really gave me the inspiration for this series of book where there is a girl playing competitively at a very high level with a group of boys. So it's about hockey, it's about the sport, but it's also about female empowerment, I guess, and bringing that in. So that's a big part of what I do. But I'm also a creative director for, I was doing that at C2 Montreal, like you said, and now at Moment Factory working in multimedia. And I do a ton of other things, but I don't want to talk for too long as an intro.
No, this is what we're here. We're here to meet our fellow citizens and connect. So for me, talk about the other books, because what's interesting about your writing is not just that you're speaking to young adults or even younger kids. It's you really don't just write a book. You tend to build characters and then build series around the characters. Mm-hmm. So one is, let's introduce everybody to the series, because there's, more than Premier Trio. And some of the names might sound familiar. Like for me, the big one was obviously Choupinette at that age, of course. But talk about how you do that. Like, what are these series and how you build out your thinking around them?
Yeah, it's true that most of what I write, especially for kids, young adults, but even for when I used to write for adults as well, they tend to be series of books. So it's really creating a world or a universe, and then you will have many installments, which I look at my kids now who are 11 and 14. That's pretty much all that they read. They're very much in the fantasy world, and from the whole universe that Harry Potter spawned, that is now, there are so many different series. And when my daughter finds a book series and there are 7 books in the series and they're all this big, she's so excited and so happy. So I think kids and teenagers like to step into a universe and get to know the characters. And for me, I don't know if I struggle to finish a story in one book or in one novel, because I often find that as you resolve one arc of the story, you're only opening up so many different options of, but what happens after, and what about this character that was maybe not so important in book one? How are they going to evolve? And it's always more about creating this universe than creating just one single story.
So talk to me a little bit about these worlds. So what are the series that people might know that you've created?
Can find. So my first series for young adults is called Coloc, and it's two best friends who were in high school together, and then they're going to CEGEP, and they are moving into an apartment together for the first time. So it's a bit young at CEGEP, but one of them comes from the Eastern Townships, and the other one, her parents have accepted the sabbatical posting overseas. So there's a reason why they're, instead of boarding at the school, they're getting this apartment. And it's really about finding yourself independent and autonomous for the first time and leaving that family life to start discovering and exploring. So it goes through friendships and first love relationships and career decisions. And to me, that part of life when you're 16 to 19 maybe is so rich, because I feel that's often when you live your first big emotion, like your first heartbreak or your first time you fall in love might be at that age. And then you have to make decisions about what are you going to study? What are you going to choose for, whether it's grade 11 or CEGEP, or if you go to grade 12 and straight to university. These decisions feel so huge when you're 17 or 18, and maybe you don't know what you want to do for the rest of your life. And I think today people like you and I and so many others know that life is not so linear, and it's not like you choose a career at 17 and you're stuck in it like, oh, I'm going to be a dentist and you're a dentist forever. Sure, that's a great life path for some people, but it can also be a lot more flexible and you can evolve. But at the time, it felt like such a huge decision. So to me, placing storytelling and narrative worlds around that age is always really inspiring, because there's so much happening. Everything's really intense. And every decision you make, you feel has a huge impact on the rest of your life at that time. So there's Coloc. There's 5 books in that series. My readers for Coloc tend to be girls from the ages of 11 to 14, who are very looking up like, oh, I can't wait to be on my own, or, going out and doing all these things. Then I have Premier Trio, which I have as a hockey series, but with a girl as one of the main characters. So in Premier Trio, which the 4th book is coming out now, it's out in libraries now. My readers tend to be 9 to 13, both boys and girls. And then the Choupinette series that I wrote was for much younger kids. So that one was for first readers, 7 to 10. So it's these books that are short stories, but printed with super big letters. So it feels like it's really thick. And the younger kids have the pleasure and the joy of like reading a proper book like a grown up. And that was inspired by my daughter's school. She's at Villa Sainte-Marceline in Westmount. So the story of Choupinette was inspired by her school. Yeah. So those are my 3 series out for teenagers, young adults, and kids.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm doing the math right and looking at what's going on, you've done like close to 20 books in like a decade. That's an incredible amount of writing. It's crazy, Nadia. I had no idea.
Yeah, I have. I think the one that came out just today is my 21st book, but I may be confused and maybe it's 22, but I know I've hit 20.
It's
and it has been a decade, because my daughter was a newborn when my first book came out. And I went to my first meeting with publishers with a 3-week-old baby. So I know exactly, I can never forget the start of my writing career, because it's exactly my daughter's age, and she turned 11.
So let's just talk about lifestyle and how you do this. I mean, this is an incredible body of work for somebody who is working full time, who's got kids. How do you find the time to write? How do you just carve out your day and make this happen? It seems insane to me.
Yeah, it's not always possible to do everything, to be honest. So when I first started writing, I wrote a lot when I had my 2 children. So during my 2 maternity leaves, I think when my daughter was born, I wrote like 2 books during the first year that she was born. I was very disciplined with nap time. So every day the nap time was not negotiable, and I wrote while she napped. Since then, I've had periods of my time where I was busier with full-time work, like at C2 Montreal and now at Moment Factory. And I've come to realize with maturity that it's not possible to do it all at once. So I wrote a lot more. I was a freelancer for 4 or 5 years. So I wrote a lot during that time and took on some freelance contracts. Now that I'm back at work full time, I took a sabbatical this summer for 3 months to write. I have a movie project that I've been working on also, and a novel. So I'm now getting better at realizing that rest is essential. When I was younger, I used to use my weekends or my evenings to write. And with kids and a full-time job, it's not sustainable. And I found that at times, if I pushed myself too much, the quality of my work would suffer, which is the only thing you don't want to happen. So it's like if you squeeze that lemon too much, there's not always juice left to come out, or high quality juice. So I've learned now to pace myself differently and to allocate time for writing that is allocated to that, and not try and squeeze it into other parts of my life like I have done in the past.
One of the interesting things I uncovered as I had kids is, while there's a lot of books and a lot of writers, the great stuff is really tough to find. I found myself, especially on the English side, really appreciating things like Dr. Seuss more than I ever could have imagined, because you buy all these other books based off of characters that have been licensed or whatever, and you're like, wow, these stories are either way over the kid's head or not. And as I was thinking about your work, and again, how much my kids enjoy your work, I'm curious, how do you write for young people, and how is it different than when we're writing in general? Which, I mean, just being a writer makes us different as communication writers and people who just write emails and reports and things like that. But what it made me really realize again is how hard it is actually to write for young people. So I'm curious where that came from, and did you always think about writing for a demographic that, you know, essentially you're not part of, or you're now a parent of?
So to answer the first part of your question, what's different about writing for children? I feel like because the context of your story is aimed at children's types of what they think about or what they worry about, the writing sort of adjusts itself. Like in my first Choupinette book, I had a little girl who dreamt of having a puppy, and the whole story is about her and her family, and they're going to get this puppy, and how are they going to train it? And because I put myself in the shoe of how a child would feel in that situation, the writing sort of adjusts itself from when you write for older demographics. What I do worry about sometimes is I worry if my vocabulary is a little bit too recherché or difficult for younger children.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes, but at the same time, you don't want to tone it down too much, especially when I look at like my 9 to 12 or 12 to 14-year-old readers, where you think, well, it's for reading books that you learn new words. And I know for myself, a lot of words I learned, I was a very voracious reader as a child and a teenager. And you see the word once and you sort of guess what it means because of the context around it. Then you see it a second time in a new context, and a third time in another context. And that's how your vocabulary is formed. You're not like learning, it's not all like word of the day and learning definitions from the dictionary. I find our vocabulary becomes richer through reading. So at the same time as I think, oh, I don't want to make it too high and turn off kids that after half a book, they're like, oh, I don't like this book. Like, you need to keep it fun and moving fast and engaging. But I try and not shy away from occasion. I don't control myself too much on that point. I just let it go.
It's also interesting in terms of, right, there's the famous saying, never judge a book by its cover. But I think we have to be obvious that in this industry, in particular the books you're writing, we're always judging books by cover, because kids are kids. And I mean, if adults do it, kids do it. And again, that's one of the things I've always admired about your work too, is not just the words within it, but how it's packaged and how it's brought to life. I mean, we jokingly have a friendship where I'll send you pictures because I reposition your books in bookstores for you to make sure that you're front and center when I can. Can you talk a little bit about how just creatively as a project, the whole thing comes together and how you think about it?
Sure. So I'm very lucky to work with a publisher. It's an independent publisher in Quebec called Les Malins, and they are very dynamic and very innovative in the way that they approach marketing, social media. Like, they really focus on young adult and children's literature, and their approach to everything that is marketing is really in sync with their market. So it's very much a collaboration with their artistic director, who will come in and suggest different things, and it's a back and forth. With the Choupinette books, I love there's like little sketches of a cat and drawings that are really cute in the front cover. My hockey series is very much like, obviously hockey, you just see like a puck, and it's very, very much a hockey world. And then Coloc is really cute because we often have little elements from the story that are drawn as if it was like a teenager doodling in her agenda at school about things that she's interested in. And they're always very bright and colorful. And I feel very lucky to work with a publisher that really puts a lot of emphasis on the cover of the books.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You talked about the Choupinette format and how they really look really big when you see them. And there's something, it reminded me of a kid more of like the Archie Digest type of thing, where it's like you feel like you're getting so much more, that it's so much bigger. That format is new and interesting. I mean, it's a different format if you haven't, if you didn't grow up, we didn't have books like that when we were kids.
No, I didn't either. In Quebec and the French market, it's a big trend. There's a huge offering of books of that format with like little drawings inside, to help younger children feel like they're reading bigger books. I think there's an age where when you read to your children, they tend to be these albums with a lot of illustrations and text. And then when they move to reading by themselves, there's really that trend of the bigger book. When my daughter was very young reading those bigger books, we used to do one chapter per night. Even when I was reading to her, or sometimes when she was learning to read, we'd do like, okay, you read one sentence and then I'll finish the page, to try and encourage her to start to read, but at the same time, give her the pleasure and the satisfaction that the story was moving along and continuing. So the one chapter per night at bedtime was very popular in my house as a way to discover bigger books and have the fun of continuing the story.
So the books are also available in France, which was a very unique thing to me, because in my background, before I got involved in digital technology, I used to publish a couple magazines here in Quebec. And the reason we created these magazines, myself and my business partner, is because typically then the rock magazines that we had here were from France. And the way we speak, the way we write culturally, it was very, very different. So how does it work? And even I'll tell you, for my first book, 6 Pixels, I had sold a version to a French publisher in France, and the Quebec publisher wanted to redo they didn't just take the actual translation that was done from the European French translator. Is that something that happens for you as well? Are there certain colloquialisms or things we use here in Quebec that make it very different in France, or is it just the book's available in both? How does it work?
So it depends on the age of the readers. So when my Coloc series went to Europe, so France, Switzerland, and Belgium, there was less translations, because we know that the older teenagers or young adults can find some pleasure in learning new expressions or finding out the Quebec way of saying certain things that are different in France. But when we looked at the Choupinette books, when one first went out in Europe, it was definitely adapted so that children did not have to stumble upon words that they didn't know because they're first readers. So there's a lot of words like le dépanneur could not exist in a French book because people don't know what a dépanneur is. Or in my older books, sometimes it's something readers like. And there's actually a lot of Quebec authors, both young adult and adult, being published in Europe at the moment, where people are finding it fun to see like ma blonde or all these ways that we have of saying things that are new to a French audience. But similarly in English, sometimes I'll read books by an African author, for example, and there will be expressions in English, or an Indian author that I don't know, but it's such a pleasure and a joy to discover that culture and way of using language that is different from our own. So I feel like people in Europe also have a lot of curiosity, and they're very interested in the Quebec expressions.
So I'm curious about how you deal with representation and diversity. It's such it's a topic that's finally here. Like, thankfully, we can have books that aren't just people that look like me. So clearly on the gender side, you've done a really good job of it. But when you're thinking about other types of cultures, again, how we live in Quebec is very different from other parts of the world. How do you think about representation and making sure that we have that? I mean, even if we think about the world of Barbie, you're starting to see not just representation in terms of skin tone, but you have people who are, maybe less able than others. They've got, certain dolls that are in wheelchairs, and really thinking about accessibility and diversity, because again, at that age, that's when we can probably make the most impact and really have people see the diversity and flavors of the world. How do you think about it, and how do you add that in, make it work?
Representation's always been very important to me in my work. I am half Arabic myself, so it's a culture that I've always tried to bring into what I do. My experience has been growing up as a child of like mixed heritage, where I was born in Montreal from a mother who was French Canadian. My father was an immigrant from Algeria. And so because that's an experience I know, I find I'll often tend to introduce characters who have this similar duality, where they could come from, one parent could be originally from Quebec or Montreal, and then one parent could have come from elsewhere. I tend to feel more comfortable in that scenario, I think, than if I were to write about a character who has recently arrived, because it becomes more difficult for me to put myself in those shoes and to do it in a way that honors that experience without making it up. Right. So it's something, in a way, I've always put in. I've always wanted these representations to feel positive. And again, I never want my books to be about diversity. I want them to be about, I'm making a life decision about where I want to study, but I so happen to have these origins that are unique to who I am. So I don't want to make it about diversity, but I just want it to be there as part of positive representations for kids and for young adults to see. But there's always that fine line where you wonder, like, how far can I go in representing experiences that I haven't had or I haven't lived? And I often wonder that with ideas of certain types of disabilities, for example, or certain types of different sexual orientations, where I want to make space for different experiences in the world, but I don't want to take up space that also should be taken by people who have these lived experiences. So it's always a difficult line. And it's something where I've very often had characters who have part Arabic backgrounds, because that helps me, because I know what I'm talking about when it's that topic, and I can bring in that representation that is very, very absent in Quebec. There are very few public figures who are of Arabic or Muslim backgrounds in Quebec, if not none. They're very hard to name. So just that already, I feel like, okay, I'm being useful to advancing this representation in society. My best friend was born in Montreal, but both her parents are from Haiti, and it's a culture and a world that I know a little bit because I grew up with her. We've been best friends since we were 5. So sometimes I'll have characters like her who were born in Montreal but have Haitian backgrounds or families, and I feel comfortable with that. So it's hugely important, but how to do it well is not always so straightforward.
So let's talk a little bit about e-readers and digital reading. We have this assumption that buying books is becoming very passé. Not for me, not for you. We're talking from the library here. How do you think about it in terms of younger readers who may have almost no interest in buying physical paper? Or do you feel that actually that generation is reawakening to buying physical books?
They're buying physical books and they're reading physical books. It's something that's been in Quebec anyway, very surprising in the publishing industry, where 10 years ago, everyone thought, well, we would see this huge curve or this huge transfer of sales to the digital supports. And it hasn't happened. When I get my, statements of sales, if I don't even think I sell 10% of my books as ebooks. Most, like the vast majority of my books, are still paper.
Do you think that that's cultural? Do you think that that's cultural to Quebec? I mean, I'm thinking about when I travel, it feels to me like I love physical magazines too. So when I go to Europe, I mean, you just can't even compare the business of physical paper bookstores to North America. Quebec seems to somewhat stand a bit unique and alone within North America in terms of just the passion for physical paper. Is that relegated to the province, or is it cultural to us?
I don't know enough about what goes on in the rest of Canada to answer that, honestly, but all I know is from the numbers in the industry here, but for book sales, libraries, etc. I think for the industry here, the threat to the old model, as it were, is more coming from the Amazons of this world than it is coming from, ebooks or digital books. So it's more about, there are big movements like support your local booksellers, and from even the bigger chains like Renaud Brie are felt like it's a Quebec company that is worth of protecting or buying your books there, as opposed to online from companies such as Amazon. So I think, but even then it's physical books. Like my daughter's at me all the time to go on Amazon and order her physical books that get delivered same day or the next day. So it's more that tide, I find, that is hard to push against, to make sure that the industry locally keeps getting that knowledge and that financing that comes with the business being local.
So I'm also really curious just about reading in general in young people. What can you tell us about that? There tends to be, one side says, well, look at Harry Potter and books like that, and look at your books and see how many people are reading it. It's unbelievable. But I do feel like the more vast majority of people think kids don't read books anymore, adults don't read books anymore. The culture of taking the time to sit with it and let it grow with you over. And I grapple with this thinking all the time, because in one hand, I want to say, yeah, people don't read books anymore. But at the same time, you will have a series like a Harry Potter, the work you're doing, and it does excessively well. So when you're looking at the world, do kids read? How should we be worried that kids aren't reading books? How do you think about it?
Yeah, kids read. And really the pandemic was actually during the bigger portion of the pandemic. There's never as many book sales in Quebec as during that time, because obviously people had more time at home and they needed more time, more things to do during that time. So kids read a huge amount, I find, and it's back to that model of the series, where kids' relationship to a book now is similar to what we have as adults to a TV series, I find sometimes, where if you get really excited, like you can't wait for the next season, and it's okay that it's in 6 months or it's in a year, but when season 2 comes out, you're super excited because you're jumping back into something that you love. So it tends to be similar with books, where kids, like the books that do super well, if you looked at the best-selling list at a library like, a bookstore like Renaud Brie, you would find that in the top 20, probably at a guess, the top 15 are like installments of a series. And there are some about like video games.
This is great news. They're binge reading. I mean, that's the best news I could ever hear.
It is a bit like that. And I know sometimes my kids will say like, oh no, I don't want to start a series when there's only one book out or two, because I'll get too frustrated having to wait. And they'd rather wait until there's like a good 5, 6, or 7 books out. And then they jump in because they know they can binge read for a few weeks and really step into one world and enjoy that.
Yeah, it seems like a natural, now that I'm thinking about it, it seems like a natural extension with what we're seeing in the growth and popularity here in North America on manga books, because they're serialized and it's almost like they are coming out in a much more rapid frequency. So you could look at a series that has 20, 30, 40 volumes, and the kids eat them up because I guess they know it's going to keep going. It's interesting.
And I think what becomes hard with that is, how do you keep up with that rhythm? Because when you look at a TV series, there's usually a writer's room, and there's 4 or 5, maybe more writers that will share writing the episodes to a TV series that keeps it moving fast. Archie comic books are like that. We don't know who actually writes the Archie comic books, so there's a bunch of people who are writing them. But when you look at novels, it's a question that's being asked sometimes, like, would it be possible to create this world that kids are really attached to, but that you could eventually have multiple writers working on this universe to really speed up that desire to binge read and have more books come out in a year? Because that becomes the challenge. Like right now, my series Premier Trio is doing super well. My publisher would take a lot more than what I'm able to do in a year because of my other commitments. So that becomes the question of how do you match the offer and the demand?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big comic book nerd. I don't know if you know that, but that's what happens in comic books. You'll have a title and they do what's called runs. They have certain writers and creators that, again, are well-known people, and they'll do a 50-episode run, and then it gets taken over by another. And it doesn't diminish the power of the title of the character of the book, because, again, those writers and artists are celebrities in their own right. And I feel like there's probably... Again, there's probably a model to think about with even that, when the title is bigger than the author, I guess, is the challenge there.
But then could you really imagine somebody other than J.K. Rowling writing a Harry Potter book? It's sort of, it's difficult.
It gets weird for sure. Thank you so much for your time, Nadia. I'm hopeful that you can let people know where they can go online and find out more about your books and more about the great work you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I think the best place to learn about my books is on my publisher's website. So it's Éditions Les Malins. You can find their website and find the books there. I know a bunch of my books are at the Westmount Library. So it's possible to find them there also. And then in any bookstore in Quebec, you'll be able to find them there as well.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Nadia. It was great speaking to you. I'm going to now just toss it back to Ashley, who will wrap it all back. And hopefully we'll see everybody back here again for another episode of Westmount Fireside Chats. Westmount Library, make sure to head down there, check out all the great new books. We're open again. We're finally open back, so you can go down there and check things out. There's some great events coming up as well. And we'll see you all soon at the library.
Thanks, Mitch. Yes, the library is open and has lots of exciting things happening. So if anyone is looking for a new series to binge read, come on down and visit the library. Nadia, thanks so much for taking the time to share your books and your experiences with us today. And thanks again, Mitch, for being such a great host as always. For everyone watching at home, if you'd like to learn more about the library and community events department's upcoming programming, please visit our website at westlib.org and sign up for the emails newsletter. Vous pouvez également visiter le site web de la ville de Westmount au westmount.org. Thanks for watching. Merci.